Happy New Year, everyone. It is 2022, the first Coastwatch Football podcast episode for the new year. And it is also indeed 1 year of Coastwatch Football. This podcast started up just at the last week of last year when the podcast finally first started up, and from there, it started off as just me talking about the Central Coast Mariners every single week, and has grown. Started up the social media pages, started doing more YouTube content, and here we are a year later. And just want to say a massive shout out to all you guys, whether this is maybe your first ever episode that you're listening to, whether you've jumped on for this past season, or whether you have been listening since day one. I appreciate it a lot. And of course, this is the show where we talk all things across the A-League men's competition, all of the biggest stories, and also chat things. Central Coast Mariners, my team, of course, who at the moment so far this season are doing quite well. And look, in this episode, I want to talk about a couple things, predominantly the January transfer window and some moves that maybe we could see happen, or some moves that maybe I could suggest for certain clubs that we can speculate on. And obviously there has been a couple transfers, some play movement already among some clubs. But I sort of want to analyze, it's an interesting point now where we've seen teams play. There's obviously been some games postponed here and there, as we all know about. Some teams have played less games, some teams have played more. But we have gotten a decent look at all of the sides in the competition. And, in pre-season, I did a podcast episode sort of like talking about, the ins and outs heading into the season and the new look squads. And there were a lot of teams that had changed up in terms of their personnel when you looked at the likes of Newcastle Jets, Melbourne Victory, who are basically like brand new sides. So now assessing how things have gone, we can go in and sort of look back at that and maybe discuss where these teams should strengthen moving forward. And of course, January is the time where that happens for a lot of football teams. So let's jump into it straight away. And we're going to talk, first of all, we're going to go through an alphabetical order, of course, so there's no bias or whatever. So we're going to start off with Adelaide United. Now, before jumping in, I do want to preface this by saying some teams are going to be easier. There's going to be easier fixed than others. There's some teams in here that honestly definitely don't need to bring anyone in. They're pretty solid, they're pretty set with their depth and everything. When it comes to Adelaide United, though, the key position that I think they need to strengthen in is a striker. And that's a very easy one, and it's in fact one that has been brought up by Carl Vert, the Adelaide coach himself. Cassini Yengi has been ruled out with injury for a few weeks, and that's the area where it's funny, they've got players there. When you look at the front third for Adelaide United, and they play basically with sort of three attacking players, the striker and the wingers. They've got Mo Toure, George Blackwood, and then on the wings, Ben Halloran, Yaya Dekuli, Craig Goodwin, Ryan Kiddo. These guys that can come in and are all super talented. Those wingers are really fast players. So there's good skill up there and there's good talent, but especially, I feel like in the middle, there's not enough proven quality at the moment, especially now that Yengi's out. George Blackwood is a striker who's just sometimes a bit hit and miss. He's never really been a consistent A-League level striker. I think he has the potential to be. He's tall, he's strong, and he can score some decent goals. We've seen him score some goals from outside the box before and everything. And Mo Toure, I feel like, is a player who's still just developing his game, and it isn't quite the fully, the final product. You know what I mean? So that's one area that I think they do need to strengthen in, and whether they bring in someone more experienced, because that's the thing when you look at the Adelaide striking department, there isn't much experience in there. So in terms of, where they look for that's the problem as well, in terms of who's available mid-season to bring in. If you look across the A-League, there's probably like a bunch of strikers who are even sitting on the bench. I mean, the first one that comes to mind is Nick D'Agostino, not that he would leave Melbourne Victory. But you look at a lot of clubs around the league, and they all have, 2 or 3 decent strikers that can slot in and do the job. Whereas at Adelaide United, it's a bit sort of rolling the dice a little bit, even with starting Cassini Yengi, a player who, again, I like Cassini Yengi a lot. I think he's a really good player. And again, a lot of promise, shows a lot of promise, but isn't quite that proven goal scorer yet. You know what I mean? And this has been an issue for Adelaide a lot. And actually, a podcast episode a couple of weeks ago had Christian Marchetti on from the Front Page Football podcast, who kindly joined the show. And he's an Adelaide United fan. I posed the question to him, in terms of, is this, should Adelaide be looking for a striker now? And he brought up the point that this isn't just an issue that's coming up now, this is an issue for Adelaide United that has been around for a long time. He brought up the likes of going back to Bruce Schutte, Sergio Van Dijk, years and years ago, since Adelaide have sort of had a really solid, consistent goal-scoring striker. So, and they've brought in so many names and that none of them are just really clicked for them in recent years. So it's going to be interesting to see what Calvert does, who he brings in, whether he shifts things around, whether he plays maybe Ben Halloran as a striker is maybe a potential option, potentially. I don't know. But for me, they're pretty well covered across the rest of the pitch. Defensively, they've got cover with George Timotheo, Mikael Jakobsen. I believe Nick Ansell unfortunately picked up another injury. Jacob Tratt is in there as well. I wouldn't be surprised if they brought in maybe an extra player just to cover in defence and maybe someone who could fill in at fullback. But it is clear to me that strike is the position. So for Adelaide, it's an easy one. And of course, I haven't even mentioned they haven't won a game yet. That scoring goals, finishing off teams is where they've been lacking a little bit so far this season. So that's Adelaide United. Let's shuffle on to Brisbane Roar now, the next team. And Brisbane, another easy one in terms of where they can strengthen. In my opinion, Brisbane Roar maybe have one of the weakest squad in the competition this year. And I said it, in my ladder prediction, I called them, was it second last or in the bottom three? I can't even remember now. It was either bottom, like second last or third last. I called them to finish towards the bottom, and they're proving that so far. To be fair, they've only played 4 games. But when you look at their squad, there's not much hope to lift them out of the rut that they've started in so far this season. The 2 positions that I've highlighted for them are a winger, like an attacking player, and centre-back. Centre-back is an easy one because Tom Aldred is out with injury. And the big one that I feel like people have sort of flown under the radar, the loss of Macaulay Gillespie, who is, a consistent player in that backline for the last 2 seasons for Brisbane Roar, has left, and he was a solid A-League level defender, man. He was tall, he was strong, he got forward on the ball at times. They don't. They've got Mlinaric, the centre back from Sydney FC, who's on loan there at the moment, playing alongside Kai True and Scott Neville. True and Mlinaric have done a decent job, it has to be said. Like, credit to them for doing the job so far. Scott Neville, we know his experience as well at A-League level. But I get the sense that, especially if Aldred's going to be out for a while, they get to bring someone else in. Especially considering that they do play with that back 3. When you're playing with 3 central defenders, you need plenty of cover there. You need at least 5, even 6 centre backs if you want really solid cover there. So I think they do need to bring someone else in as well, just a bit more experience as well. Because when you look, you've just got Scott Neville and Tom Aldred, who's out at the moment. Those are the 2 sort of more experienced central defenders in the Brisbane squad at the moment. And in terms of the attacking player, a winger, I think they're just they from all the games that I watched with Brisbane Roar, like, they have created chances. Like, they haven't been absolutely horrendous, but they've just looked toothless. You know what I mean? Like, when they get forward, you don't get the sense that they're really going to that they're going to create too much danger. They look a little bit out of sorts. One of the things that Warren Moon has done at Brisbane Roar this season he's tweaked their setup a couple of times actually so far in the first few games. Last season we saw him sort of play with a striker and like 2 wide players supporting the lone striker. This year it's been swapping around a little bit. He's predominantly this year been playing sort of Ramad Akbari as almost like a number 10, and then sort of 2 attacking players who will like come out wide. So Akbari is almost playing as like a false 9. And it's like Nikolai Muljeznic is in there. We've seen Cyrus Demi start. Luka Vanovic has probably been their most promising player in attack. Juan Lascano has come in and played a couple. He started the last game against Western United. He came off the bench against Melbourne Victory. He scored a goal in the FA Cup a couple of months back. But it might be a little while for him to settle in compared to some of the other overseas strikers that have come in and hit the ground running pretty well. So there's question marks in attack for me, in terms of they've got Alex Parsons in there as well, who hasn't really been given too much of a look in so far this season, and they've got the young guys that they've brought in when it comes to Henry Horges, Lofthouse. But again, I think they need someone else up there, just to bring that quality, just a different sort of weapon. especially with Luka Ivanovic is another good example. Talking about Adelaide previously, how they've got Cassini, Yengi, George, Blackwood, Moture. Like they're players that show promise, but I don't think they're not quite there just yet. And I think it might be the same issue with Luka Ivanovic. Like, is he really? Is he going to cope with the pressure of maybe being Brisbane's key attacking player this season? I'm not sure. He could. He certainly could. He could. He has the potential to be it, but. Yeah, I think for Brisbane at the moment, if they need to turn things around real quick, because they haven't won a game so far this season, and I think they need reinforcements in attack as well. So there's two positions I'm going to highlight there for the Roar. Talking about my Central Coast Mariners now, and look, honestly, I'm so stoked with what's going on with the Central Coast Mariners, and I've talked about it and linked in some podcast episodes previously in terms of the Mariners youth and how promising it's looking, especially for the future. The fact that so many young guys have come into the squad. When you look at Max Ballard, Harry Steele, Jacob Farrell, Dan Hall, Lewis Miller. I mean, you could go on forever. There's so many names that have come in and performed well and have shown a lot of promising signs. The key position for me, though, I think the Mariners need to look at is it's interesting actually. Before the season, I would have said centre mid, but I'm going to say centre back now. I think centre back is the position where we just need a little bit more depth. Tongik has missed the last few games through injury. And I have heard whispers of maybe whether it's Tongik or Rolls scoring a move away from the club. Purely whispers at this stage, nothing concrete. But there is that talk around, especially some of the younger players, as there always is. So I think Dan Hall has come in and Kai Rolls has done a fantastic job, but maybe just another player just to come in there and able to slot in and help out. I mean, we do have Lewis Miller who can shift in as well, but then that just leaves Stormaru alone on in terms of right fullback. So maybe one more central defender would be handy. But again, Mariners for me, honestly, is one of the teams that aren't as desperate to bring someone in. Even in the midfield position, man. Yeah, just to touch again on Max Ballard and Harry Steele, who I think have been fantastic this season. They've been really, really good. And for me, if the young players are playing well, you got to keep giving them game time. Their confidence is just going to keep growing and growing. And that's going to happen because we see it in the Mariners. Young players get the opportunity, and if they're performing, they'll get the game time, and I'm sure Nick Montgomery will keep that up for the whole season. So, if Mariners fans, we'd love to hear what you guys think in terms of what position would you like to see strengthened. I should touch on it as well because I don't think I've touched on it in a podcast episode. But of course, Mariners in recent days have been linked with Jason Cummings, who's currently playing his football in Scotland, a striker, which is an interesting one considering that. In the striker department, we have Mateus Maresh, Arenya, Nikolai Muller can slot up in there now that he's back from injury. Matt Simon, when he's back from injury, of course, he's been out so far this season. And then the young guys coming through, when you look at Harry McCarthy, Damien Sekenis, we've even seen, Manny Aguek in there. Garen Kowal came on and grabbed a goal in the FA Cup against Apia Leichhardt. That's 8 players that I've mentioned there that can play up front for the Central Coast Mariners. And, of course, we play with 2 strikers up front. The only reason why maybe it is just sort of just talk at the moment in terms of Jason Cummings coming to the Mariners, but the only reason why maybe this is coming up is potentially Matt Simon's injury is worse than we first thought. Maybe he's considering, maybe this injury is going to keep him out for a little while, and maybe he's thinking about hanging up his boots. I don't think he will. I think he will try and get back and at least play a couple of games, before the end of the season, hopefully, if he can get back. But that's maybe if Nick Montgomery if this actually is happening, maybe that's part of the thinking. Because, if Matt Summers coming back fit, I can't see how Cummings is going to fit into the side. Maresh and Arenya already seem to be proving to be creating a solid partnership. And then, Nikolai Muller is going to be fighting for a spot because he's a fantastic player. And, of course, Matt Simon was our top goal scorer last season. You know what I mean? We already have really good cover. And then the young guys that have come through, Sekenis has been given game time. Harry McCarthy looks promising as well. It's very bizarre. Out of all the positions, I'd take a wing, I'd take, another centre mid, I'd take another defender. Striker is the last position I'd want strengthened. So it is a perplexing one. That's why I raised the point about maybe Matt Simon's injury is worse than thought. So that's the explanation for me. Let's keep shuffling through the teams, though. MacArthur FC, again, another team, pretty solid overall. There's a couple of key positions I want to highlight for them. Maybe when it comes to central midfield, when you look at the players, the personnel that have been playing in there, Charles Mombois and Tommy Orr. They've actually been playing Tommy Orr as sort of one of those holding, not holding midfielder, but one of those central midfielders. And it has worked so far. Those guys have actually done an okay job of sitting in front of that back four. They work so hard because they have to get up and down the pitch, sitting in the middle of the field. And they do have cover in there with Anthony Martis, Liam Rose, Jordan Much, who's starting to come back into the side now, who was signed in pre-season. But maybe just to bring in one more player, just with a really sort of a player who specialises in that sort of position. Again, Mombois and Tommy Orr have done a fantastic job. But just to solidify things for them, maybe just a solid defensive midfielder, just to be able to slot in there. Because when I look at Charles Mombois and Tommy Orr, none of them they're not defensive-minded players. They're sort of. I mean, Tommy, I don't even want to call Tommy. I was going to call him a box-to-box midfielder, but Tommy Orr, I mean, we know him as a wide midfielder, but I guess later on in the career we are seeing him shift back a little bit and could even slot in at wing-back as well. So maybe in the central midfield position, that's one that comes up for me. Aside from that, maybe some cover in the wing-back positions as well. Craig Noon and Moody Najjar have actually been really good for them so far this season. But maybe some cover in there. Again, MacArthur's a good example where they maybe don't need necessarily some first-team players, but maybe just some cover in some key positions as well. For Melbourne City, again, another team that has fantastic squad depth. But for me, I'm going to go fullback, and that's purely coming off the back of the departure of Nathaniel Atkinson, who of course scored a fantastic move to Scotland, and just to bring someone else in just to cover those positions, because at the moment they've got Scott Jemison on the left, Scott Galloway on the right. And apart from that, obviously they've got the young guys coming through that can slot in there, but maybe just a little bit of cover. It was really handy for them, especially in their championship-winning year last season too. The rotation of especially Scott Galloway and Natty Atkinson, those two are keeping each other on their feet, in terms of who's going to be starting each week. Scott Galloway is absolutely a quality fullback and can be starting week in, week out. But maybe just another player just to slot in, just to provide some squad depth, maybe coming from the bench. For Melbourne Victory, again, Melbourne Victory probably the hardest one to pick, because for me, Victory have the best squad depth in the competition. They do. I genuinely believe that, and they've proven that so far. Look in the FA Cup; they've been playing second-string squads, and there's some good players in that second-string squads. When you look at the likes of Valupale, the young guys that have been playing really well, Valupale, Leighton Brooks, Laurie Latanzio. I mean, Robbie Cruz has sort of been playing as a number 10 as well. And then even those holding midfielders that come in as well, Burke and Kurtar and Jay Barnett. It's good. There's really good cover all over the pitch. The only position that I could think of is maybe another attacking midfielder. They've got Jake Brimmer, who's sort of been starting there, and they have brought in Robbie Cruz off the bench to play in that position as well. And they've got good wingers and strikers when you look at the likes of Leighton Brooks, the players I mentioned, Brooks, Valupale, Laurie Latanzio. But just maybe another number 10, or even just a central midfielder, just to come in and just to cover that positions as well. But again, not desperate at all. I mean, when you do, again, when it comes to the midfield position, Burke and Kurtar, Jay Barnett, these guys have shown promise as well. So if I was Tony Popovich, I wouldn't be worried about making any signings mid-season. So yeah, they're looking so good at the moment, Melbourne Victory. For Newcastle Jets, I wrote down attacking midfielder. Again, they're pretty decent depth all around. An attacking midfielder, I look at their squad, and Daniel Pena's done such a fantastic job. But if he was to go missing with injury, there isn't necessarily any stand-up players who would be able to slot in there. Maybe you shift Costa Grozos up to that number 10 position, maybe Angus Thurgate even. But those guys have been doing really well in sort of those number 6 positions. And aside from that, maybe another central defender. I mean, they've got Matt Yerman, Jordan Elsey, Riley Wallen can slot in there as well. So maybe another central defender just to cover that in there as well. But again, another one of the sides who are looking pretty good overall in terms of their squad depth. For Perth Glory is another hard one, actually. They've got a lot of good young players coming through. When you look at the likes of Josh Rawlins, and then up top, Kieran Bramwell, Nyonga Beery, of course, has gotten some decent game time this season. Daniel Steins, Callum Timmins in midfield. Luke Bodnar has looked really solid so far this season as sort of the holding midfielder. But that's one of the positions that I did want to bring up, the sort of the defensive midfield position. Brandon O'Neill, he played the first game and then hasn't played since because he's been expecting the arrival of his child over in Western Australia. And that sort of meant they had to shift their system, and just Luke Bodnar was sort of playing alone as a sort of a lone defensive midfielder at times in some of those games since. And it sort of shows maybe they do need just a little bit of extra cover if the likes of O'Neill or if Bodnar was to get injured. Callum Timmins is able to slot in there, but maybe just one more just to cover that defensive midfield position. And aside from that, maybe another central defender as well. Darryl Latchman, Jonathan Aspro have actually been pretty solid so far this season, despite conceding some goals here and there. But maybe some more defensive cover there as well for Perth Glory. For Sydney FC, and of course Sydney FC have made a signing so far, Mustafa Amini returning to Australia. Of course, former Central Coast Mariner. I know Musty very well from his Mariners days. And this is a good signing because, of course, the injury to Luke Bratton has been such a big one and has really affected them. Obviously, Sydney FC have turned it around. They've won their last 2 games in the A-League men's competition. Looks the central midfielder position is pretty well covered now with Mustafa coming in. Had they not signed him, I would have definitely said another holding midfielder. They got to bring in someone to replace Luke Bratton because it's a hard player to replace, man. Because Bratton is so good. And again, aside from that, they're pretty well covered. I would maybe say one more centre back. I mean, at the moment they've got Wilkinson, Donachie, Ben Wallen can come in and do a decent job as well. So maybe one more central defender just to provide a little bit more depth in that position. But again, when you look at especially up top, they've got good talent there. They've got the experience, and then the young guys who have been coming in and playing the last couple games have looked really, really good as well. For Wellington Phoenix. And again, Wellington Phoenix for me, maybe equal worst squad depth for me. And they've done a decent job considering the squad that they have got. They have actually played well. They've lost their last 3 games, but that haven't been terrible. But the positions that stand out for me, centre mid and centre back. Especially that centre back position. When you look at, they've been playing Tim Wayne and Josh Laws in there. Aside from that, they've got Bozanovsky, who's on loan from Melbourne Victory. And apart from that, it's looking a bit thin. I imagine if they were to lose one of those players, especially someone like Tim Wayne, who's come in, Tim Payne, who's really a leader in that side for Wellington Phoenix at the back. If they were to lose him through injury, it'd be a little bit concerning, having that experience, not having that experience at the back. And then another one which we can bring up, which is sort of almost, a very current one, Ollie Sale is going to be out with injury for I believe it's 6 to 8 weeks off the top of my head. Something like that. It's a couple of months, I think. Alex Paulson has come in and they've said he's going to do the job. Whether they maybe bring someone in just on a temporary break basis, just an injury replacement for Ollie Sale, maybe. I don't think they will. From what we've heard from Ufuk Taylor, it looks like they are just going to give Alex Paulson a run in the side. So a good chance for the young Kiwi goalkeeper. And as well the centre mid position, which I mentioned as well. Alex Rufer, Clayton Lewis doing a good job in there as well, and they've got Nicholas Pennington, who has gotten limited game time so far. But maybe just, again, one more player just to provide a little bit of squad depth as well. And of course, Sandoval, who I forgot to mention as well. They have made the signing of Sandoval, which is a great signing, Mexican attacking player who we imagine is going to sort of fill the void by Ulysses De Villa, you'd imagine. Brilliant signing, fantastic signing. They had to make that signing because that was a position they were thin in. They basically had Rennie Piscopo, who had a lot of weight on his shoulders to carry the attacking thrust of the side. They've got Ben Old in there as well. David Ball was able to play in sort of one of those number 10 positions as well. So that was a fantastic signing just to bring in some more quality in that position in the final third. For Western Sydney Wanderers, and Wanderers is a tricky one because for the Western Sydney Wanderers, they're the trickiest one, and here's why. Because I spoke about it in pre-season. I was so excited about that squad. They look so good on paper, right? And they still do. You look at the side and dude, that team should be winning games. That team should be top 6. They're not, as we all know. And there's been issues on and off the field for Western Sydney Wanderers. Massive pressure on Carl Robinson, the coach at the moment. But then it's not quite clicking for them at the moment. And it's not quite clear why they're not clicking. And that's why a lot of people are looking at the manager. Their squad is so good, but the manager just doesn't have them playing cohesively at the moment. So for me, when you look at the Western Sydney Wanderers, they've got good cover all over the pitch. defensively in the midfield position, they've got great cover now. With Ugarkovic, Bacchus is still yet to come back from injury. And then you've got Rodwell and Tonis in there as well. So really good central midfield players. Up front, now up front's the interesting one because when you look at up front, and when I say up front, I mean sort of the four players that they play up there because they sort of got the three attacking midfielders playing in behind the striker up front. You got Bernie Abini. Ogawa's looked promising. Dimitri Petratis hasn't looked very confident so far this season. James Troisi has probably been their best player in attack for them, surprisingly. Tom Mohamed has got on the score sheet, but hasn't looked like his usual self. And then they've got some of the young guys coming through, like Badalado, who's gotten some game time as well, and Rami Najjarine, of course. Maybe just another striker, I think. Maybe a striker or maybe a wide player just to come in and bring in something different. But probably the striker more so, though. They've got Tom Mohamed. If he goes out injured, I mean, they've got Geordie Swibble to come in. But I think just something different in an attack. And especially having another striker that would allow them to pivot around if they did want to shift their shape and maybe play with two strikers up front, which Carl Robinson has done in the past. So it's tricky to see who they would bring in. There aren't that many quality strikers available on the market, especially in Australia at the moment. But that's why it's a tricky one for me because they're not playing well. They're not playing cohesively as a team at the moment, but then aren't necessarily, when you look at the team on paper, there aren't necessarily positions holes, that there aren't obvious holes with they need to strengthen here, they need to strengthen here. In my opinion, they've got quality there. Defensively, they've actually been really, really good. Really, really good. So that's the one for me. Striker position, maybe just someone different in the final third for them. Tom Mohamed's fantastic, but just some extra cover in there. Maybe a versatile attacking player who could play as a striker or out wide as a winger. Yeah. And then the final one, Western United. We're going to talk about Western United, who have been fantastic so far this season. They're in the top three at the moment, and were brought down by Melbourne victory 3-1 in their last game. And another perplexing one because for me, there aren't necessarily too many positions where they need to strengthen in because they've got good young players coming through as well. When you look at the likes of Milanovic, Noah Botic hasn't gotten a run yet. Thea Harris, they've got Markovic as well, who can slot in at left back. Some of these younger guys who have gotten some runs in the FFA Cup, and they did get knocked out in the Cup against Wellington Phoenix. So, but there's a lot of promise there in a lot of the young players, and I think John Aloisi's going to be the right man to bring those young guys in. When I looked at the West United squad, though, maybe the position that they could probably strengthen in is someone just to cover maybe Diamante in that attacking midfield role. They probably do have players that they could, some of those young guys, those young attacking names that I mentioned there, probably could shift in. Milanovic is another player that I didn't mention as well. Some of these players could probably shift into that number 10 role. Funnily enough, Diamante was missing in that victory game. He was actually tested positive for COVID, apparently. And they shifted Lockie Wales into that number 10 role, started Dylan Parias on that right-hand side. That makes sense as well. I think Wales is probably underutilized in a central position like that. The wing position is where he's most dangerous for sure. So maybe just another attacking midfielder just to cover that position. I think they're okay when it comes to defensive midfield. They've got Kilkenny and Lustica, who have established a solid partnership. Rennie Krhin, we haven't seen him at all. I believe he's Slovenian, the midfielder who joined in off-season and believe he's still out with injury. So, I'm sure we'll see him soon. And they've got cover there and Jerry Skatadis as well. So, defensively, they're pretty well covered. The only position that really came to mind was maybe some cover for Diamante. If he does pick up any injuries, I mean, he's Diamante barely misses a game, and he plays out full games too. Considering he's heading towards his late 30s, the dude's got fantastic stamina. His ability to run out the games, and yeah, of course we know how important he is to that Western United side. So hey, of course, would love to hear your thoughts on some of these suggestions there. Would love to hear your suggestions. Drop down in the comments wherever you're listening to this podcast, or you can send a message on any of the social media platforms. We'd love to get your feedback. For your team, where do you want to see strengthened? After seeing your squad play, some teams have played really well, some teams not so much. Where do you want to see strengthened in your team at the moment after seeing how your team has played in these opening few rounds? Of course, this podcast is available. New episodes drop every single Tuesday and are available on all podcast platforms. That includes Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and of course the full video episodes available on the Coast Watch Football YouTube channel. It is 2022. Hope you have a fantastic start to the new year. Thanks for tuning into this episode. If you have enjoyed it, feel free to give it a like or give it a rating on a podcast platform. I appreciate it a lot, and I'll see you guys in the next one.